First of all, I'd like to thank the audience for joining our webinar today, SAP Divestitures Done Right, how SMP can help your company achieve deal value by accelerating transformation execution. My name is Miranda Burke, and I'm the Senior Marketing Manager here at SMP and your host for today. We are recording, and it's a 30-minute webcast, and all the registrants will be sent the link to the recording and presentation at the end. Questions can be asked at any time via the chat function on the side of your screen, and we'll answer them throughout the presentation and at the end. And as you know, you do have the flexibility to adjust the screen size, and you can find that expand button right in the middle of your screen, directly below the speaker boxes. Now, introducing my esteemed colleague, we have Darren Shaw here. He is joining us live from our SMP office in Irving, Texas. Darren is our VP of Marketing and Aerospace and Defense Competency Leader. With that, Darren, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Miranda, as always, and thank you, everyone, for attending this session on SAP Divestitures Done Right. Let us jump right into it. So, as usual, there's some bad news with the good news, right? Statistics through Kearney and others have shown that there's only about 30% rate of value creation with divestitures. And in some cases, there's actually value destruction. So I thought I would start with just some overview information, and I won't go through all of these. You'll get a copy of the presentation if you'd like one. But just I want to hit a couple of things and also kind of go through some definitions here. So the first one's obvious, right? Clear, transparent, convincing reasons why you want to split off part of the business. You'll see number 3 here, dyssynergies. What is a dyssynergy? A dyssynergy in the simplest sense is, for example, if you have a single resource managed by one department, and then that dyssynergy then becomes 2 people being managed by 2 different departments. So what can happen is you can have a similar dyssynergy that can happen in the divestiture process, right? So think about the opposite of a synergy, where the 1 + 1 = 3, or in some cases 1 + 1 from a cost perspective equals 0.5, 0.75, right? So and then another definition here is stranded costs, right? So what is a stranded cost? Stranded costs can be assets that are left behind that are not going to be utilized fully. So think about from an IT perspective, you're running a 50 terabyte system and you carve off 20, you're left with 30 terabytes, but you still have all the hardware for 50. So that's excess capacity, right? So that's an example of a stranded cost. Commercial agreements with suppliers that are now no longer part of the business, and some of those could be still part of the business, but based upon certain volumes. Well, if you've sold off part of the company, you're now held to those volumes. So those are some stranded costs examples. And then some of these other ones, right? Someone at the leadership helm for these divestitures is always important. And also, and this is where we get into the speed aspect, when aggressive timelines are followed. And this is a topic we're going to dive into about how to make the divestiture aggressive without undue risk, okay? So cost, right? At the end of the day, there's math. So there's 2 stages to a typical divestiture, right, from a cost perspective. One is hitting a post-divestiture target, and that is you look at your current state baseline. You've now sold off part of this company. You've spun it off into its own independent organization, or you've sold it to a buyer. And you have that set of transferable costs, which are assets, people, other types of expenses that go to the new organization. But then you've got those stranded costs, right? So as I mentioned, IT costs, shared services, commercial agreements, and the goal is to mitigate and remove those stranded costs as soon as possible, so that you now have this post-divestiture target where, okay, all things being equal, now this is where my cost should be had that organization not been part of my company to begin with. But that's not the end, right? That's really only half the journey. The other piece of this is now that we have maybe a lighter organization or an organization that is more geared towards our future strategy, what additional operational efficiencies can we gain now that we have done this deal, right? So where is that additional shareholder value as a result of this divestiture, right? Other cost takeout levers, and then prioritizing that action plan, and that then gets to your long-term target, that reduction in overhead that's really going to please shareholders. All right. People have heard of a TSA. I'm not talking about TSA from an airport security perspective. I'm talking about a transitional services agreement. What is that? For those of you not aware. A lot of times when a company is spun off, they are unable to recreate the organizational structures, supporting processes that they had when they were part of the original company. We'll call that, RemainCo versus now this new entity, SpinCo. And those TSA costs are not just IT support related. They cover finance, procurement, environmental health and safety, HR, audit support, insurance, anything process or technical, even facilities management. Those are all costs that the SpinCo may need the former parent company to cover for them during a typically 2 to 3 year, mostly 3-year period where they are have time to get their own act together. All right. So here's a live example. Mead Johnson, right? So Mead Johnson Nutrition spun off from Bristol Myers Squibb around 2008, 2009. Okay, so Mead Johnson's revenue when it was spun off into its own business was about 2.8 billion. Okay, and they had about 201 million shares outstanding when they became its own company. The monthly TSA cost was 7 million. Right, so annually that's 84 million, and the 3-year TSA term has $254 million spent. Okay, I'm gonna go back up to that 7 million because I want to give you a sense of why the IT aspect is so important. Right, so of that $7 million a month, 3.17 million were related to global IT services, 2.65 million just for the US alone, right? So a little less than half, maybe about 40% of the 7 million was IT related. So think about that, 40% roughly of $254 million was all related to IT support, right? So as a percentage of revenue, that's 2.97% of revenue that Mead Johnson was spending as part of this TSA agreement. So there's two motivations, right? So obviously as SpinCo, right, Mead Johnson sure as heck did not want to spend $254 million over those 3 years, right? So it behooves SpinCo like a Mead Johnson to get off as soon as humanly possible on this TSA. They're not held to 3 years. If you end or don't require a service early, TSAs can always be modified. If you are RemainCo, the CIO is not going to have his or her bonus increased because they made revenue for the full 3 years from an IT perspective. That's not what the CIO is paid for, right? The CIO, he or she is paid for innovation and contributing to top line growth, not being measured on how much TSA dollars that they raked in. So it behooves everybody that the TSA and we're talking about from a CIO perspective now, is ended or curtailed as soon as possible, right? So there's a lot to consider just from an IT perspective, right? That both RemainCo and SpinCo have to deal with. So let's start with SpinCo, right? So what do I need from IT where I can operate effectively, right? So do I move as is? So carve out, lift and shift, that's fine. Don't do anything involving transformation. I'll deal with that later. I just want to be able to transact, right? Support procurement, support supply chain, support HR, et cetera. Is there a way to move and transform, but again, while keeping that TSA shortened? Can I optimize IT processes in that period? For example, if if you're looking at IT support processes, maybe we can do something better now as maybe a smaller subset of a company. In terms of the people, right? Did we get the right IT skills, not only to support the infrastructure and the IT applications that we got now, but are these the right folks to take us into the future with transformation? Are there other options where we might go from a data center into the cloud? Or maybe the SI that we used was okay, but maybe we want to move with something better. So there's a lot of options from an IT perspective. On the SpinCo side, on the RemainCo side, there's a lot of renegotiation to do, right? If you had applications and infrastructure that supported 5,000 employees and now you have 3,000 employees, that all needs to be renegotiated. That's a lot of work. Do I now have the remaining staff? Are they the right people? Again, to drive towards their own optimization and transformation post-divestiture. If it's a 3-year TSA, I have got to allocate resources to support SpinCo. And how is that going to take away from the staff I need to transform? And does that mean that I need to go out and hire more people to do more of the strategic thinking and planning for the future versus doing application management or infrastructure management? And when do I begin the cost optimization activities? Lots of things happening in a very, very tight time window. You would like to begin to think about these things as early as possible, even before the deal transacts. Unfortunately, a lot of times it's okay, we're spun off, now what? Or from a RemainCo perspective, okay, we've done the logical and then physical separation. And now, yes, from a staffing perspective, obviously they know what's going on because they lost X amount of people, but that cost optimization activities and some of that renegotiation work, a lot of times that starts after the fact, and a lot of that can be done a lot sooner, which is a risk mitigator. So here's an example. There's a company in Australia called Wesfarmers, and they owned a grocery store chain in Australia called Coles. 250 locations across Australia. So they wanted to spin them off into their own legal entity. Now, this was initially planned for 18, well, they said 12 to 18 months, but privately they thought it might last a bit longer. So they had to roll off Coles into its own entity. Problem was that Coles was never its own legal entity in the past. So now you've got to set up statutory processes, statutory reporting from an accounting perspective. Standalone company. There's also an Ariba implementation going on for the company. They wanted to move to S4. They also wanted to move to the cloud, and they hadn't done any of their S4 pre-projects. And they were thinking, okay, 12 to 18 months, more like 18 to 24, and this is going to cost us a fortune. The original plans were simply not tenable. Enter SNP. We were able to, in one go live, we were able to execute all of the pre-projects, new GL, business partner conversion, Unicode conversion, carve out the Coles data, move them to S4, and that project, as opposed to 12 to 18 months plus, was completed in 5 months. So think about, and if you go back to the Mead Johnson example, obviously that's not going to apply here, but 18 months versus 5 months, that's 13 months at X million per month just for the IT piece alone. Significant cost savings there. And that's what we were able to do for Coles, leveraging our Crystal Bridge solutions. We've done it more than once. So for example, some other divestiture and carve-out examples. Murphy Oil, 2.6 billion, sold its assets. We carved out data from SAP, not just ECC, but environmental health and safety, IS Oil. The project was planned for 9 months. We did it in 5. Airnov, we carved out 6 legal entities, 12 plants, 5 purchasing organizations and sales organizations, and parts of other plants. So for those of you familiar with SAP, this was a below company code carve out, which for most companies is very difficult, not for us. BSW Timber, we, similar to Coles, it was a carve out from ECC. That carve out was migrated to S4HANA, and then that was all moved to Azure, again, all in 6 months. And as a global industry first, we executed the first known carve out from an S4HANA system. And this was off of the super absorbance business that they spun off from Evonik, and that took place within about 10 months by company code and by time slice. The time slice aspect came from the fact that they wanted to put their historical data in a more accessible but cost optimized location. So there was an archiving, optimized data storage aspect to that as well. So we've done this multiple times, and a lot of these, for example, going back to Murphy, right? Plan for 9, did it in 5. And so these are just some simple examples. So, how could we help with divestitures, whether you're RemainCo or SpinCo, or maybe you're even an advisory firm? So let's take it from the top, right? The more simple step. Deep system analysis, right? So if you're spinning off, if you're RemainCo, okay, well, what does it look like if I spin off X number of company codes, X number of plants, or if we're carving out parts of plants, what's going to be the effort? What data am I going to be left with, and what's the size of that data? And then you can look at your current infrastructure and hardware, say, okay, well, what's the future state going to look like? So you can plan to deal with the dyssynergies and the stranded costs that typically will arise. You can do a lot of that planning early, and a lot of that information about your SAP system can then be translated back into, for example, what are my SAP application management services requirements, and whether I own those in-house, or whether those are now with an outsourcing partner. And that's another example of a contract that's going to need to be renegotiated. You can take a detailed inventory of all interfaces as part of the deep system analysis. That's going to be very helpful, particularly if you're moving SpinCo into the cloud, and you're going to be taking a copy, or they're going to be using a copy of your SAP configuration. It'll be very, very helpful for SpinCo to understand what interfaces are going to need to be put in place from a cloud standpoint. And again, you also are going to understand which interfaces might need to be shut down if there are some satellite applications that are going to be spun off. Data cleanup, all right? So you're taking this opportunity to spin off SpinCo, and SpinCo is going to take history as well as current documents, current current calculations. Well, okay, well, what do we do with that history? SpinCo could take that history and put that into the cloud, put that into, again, accessible, cost optimized storage. RemainCo can also do the same. So along with the data that's being spun off with SpinCo, RemainCo can take this opportunity to do an effective, quick archiving exercise with our help, and put that in a lower cost. So that gets towards that future optimized cost base versus just the cleanup of strand costs. So you can already start to plan for future cost optimization way up front. Just doing the carve and move aspect quickly, whether that is maybe it starts with a logical carve out and then moves to a physical, or just going to go right to a physical carve out. You've seen the timelines and how much faster we can do it versus standard planning. This also frees up RemainCo IT staff so that they do less support of SpinCo and more focusing on their own IT transformation, process support, application investment, cloud, whatever future state, future technologies need to be employed. You can enable transformation while divesting. RemainCo could take that opportunity after a move of, say, ECC or carve out, excuse me, of ECC, start in S4 transformation. It could be the right time. But again, there's cultural aspects and there's cost aspects, but again, the art of the possible, right? And to benefit both sides, terminate the IT TSA components faster. So there are different audiences that can benefit from our services. So if you are an advisory company and you're helping a company plan for its divestiture, you can provide SAP Crystal Bridge as SMP, excuse me, Crystal Bridge as part of your arsenal to help RemainCo look at its data and plan ahead to mitigate the challenges of cost containment and cost optimization. If you are an advisory company, please contact Fred Reiser, who is our VP of Strategic Partnerships. Are you a regional SI or a global SI, systems integrator, and you're tasked to do the carve-out of a business, and you've given RemainCo a budget that does not particularly sit well and is not fast enough? We partner with all SIs, and we are easy to integrate into your methodology. So again, if you are an SI and looking to see how we can give a jumpstart to your divestiture as well as M&A services, once again, please contact Fred Reiser. And are you part of RemainCo or SpinCo and you would like to work with us directly? The things that we can do through an SI, which we're always happy to do, we could also do for you. And we can talk to you about the span, but also limitations of the services that we offer. Be happy to talk to you as well about what your current SAP system looks like, what's going to look like post-divestiture, and then what might that transformation roadmap look like. And the cases where if you are the RemainCo or SpinCo, please contact Neil McLean, who is our Vice President of Direct Sales. So this was fairly quick, but it does give you a glimpse into the art of the possible. Thank you very much. And I know we have about 5 minutes left, so I will stop and we'll see if there are any questions. Miranda?
Yeah, thank you, Darren. I know we covered a lot of information in 30 short minutes, so don't worry. We'll be sending you the PowerPoint and the recording via email. Additionally, I'll include other resources such as blog posts and customer success stories, and you can peruse at your leisure. As I poll questions, I'd like to make you aware we are sponsoring the ASUG SAP for Utilities conference that's taking place in Chicago this year, October 9th through the 11th. So if you're attending or you know a colleague that will be on site, I invite you to stop by the S&P booth 104 to say hello. We'll be demoing the power of our software automation platform, Crystal Bridge, live and in person. All right, first question, Darren. The statistics that you showed for IT TSA costs, is that fairly common across all industries?
It is. As a general statement, IT happens to be a very large proportion. Now, if you're a small company still running on Excel spreadsheets, obviously it won't be quite that big, but industry standards, and these are industry agnostic, that IT cost is a substantially large component of the TSA.
Thank you. And what is the largest carve project that S&P has done?
So, slight spin, but we were responsible for the split of the Hewlett-Packard company in 2015. And they, at that time, were about a $105 to $106 billion organization. And we essentially carved that system in half. So, yeah, quite a large project.
Excellent. All right, if there isn't any more questions from the audience, I would again like to thank you guys for joining today. Give you guys a couple minutes back to your schedule. Thank you again, Darren. I appreciate everyone's time.
Right on. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.